back to the build. My next job is to get the steering working, so I've got to fit this rack and pinion out of a Peugeot 205 onto my chassis. I chose this Peugeot 205 GTI rack and pinion at the beginning of the build because it was cheap, only $25 on eBay, and because it was about the right width that I needed. I actually adjusted the width of the chassis to make it fit the length of the rack. But now I'm starting to actually fit it with the front suspension nearly made. Another issue has arisen. With the suspension on full droop, the tie rod end from the rack and pinion won't swivel enough to allow me to put that fitting in the steering arm. And once again, the limitation is this factory joint here. So I'm going to have to replace that one and replace the one up the other end as well. When Peugeot fitted this rack into the 205, they just used these two mounting tabs. But in off-road racing, there's a very real danger that because of the forces coming to the front end, these castings will rip clean off. So what I've done in fabricating the brackets for the rack is to put a bolt on either side and to put a strap right over the top. I've also made those bolts very long so that I can pack underneath and get the rack exactly where it needs to be height-wise to eliminate bump steer. Brackets lightly onto the skid plate, and that'll allow me to completely check the positioning of the rack and pinion and make any adjustments with height spaces that I need to. That's going to be a very rigid mounting system. I've got the smaller Heim joint from the States that I'm going to mount on the end of the rack to replace this swivel joint because the factory one won't articulate enough to handle a long travel suspension. I was hoping to mount this onto the rack so that I could adjust the width of the rack, but I found I can't really do that. If I put it so that this adjustable joint collar is on the end of the rack, I put the joint out too far. If I put the joint where the Heim joint where the factory joint was, I've got to cut too much off the rack and I'll lose steering lock. So I've got to do the exact opposite. What I've got to do is mount the Heim joint on the tie rod end and put a bracket to take it onto the end of the rack and pinion. So that's what I'm going to do. I've made up some brackets and I'll mount it there like that. I'm not going to mount these brackets parallel with the shaft. I'm going to cut it at an angle and mount it like that just because it lines up better with the suspension hub, and there's sideways movement obviously allowed for in that Heim joint. While Raptor was in storage for 7 months while I sold my house and moved into temporary accommodation, I was still working on the build, buying parts in Australia and from overseas. Let's unpack some of these goodies and see where they go. These headers are going to save me weight, increase the performance of the engine and make a really sweet noise. To make this exhaust system look better and last longer, I'll eventually spray it with 1200°F special exhaust heat-proof paint. But before I can do that, I've got to temporarily fit the pipes and take the car to my exhaust shop so he can make the last bend and fit a muffler for me. Before you spray that sort of paint on factory headers, you've got to remove this paint. It's just silver paint. If you leave it on and heat the car up, it'll burn and leave an ash, and that will lower the effectiveness and adhesion of your exhaust paint. So I'll temporarily fit these headers. I'll spray them with paint stripper and get off that paint, and that way I can get the system to the exhaust shop. It's time to think about water cooling and radiator placement. When guys build water-cooled engine buggies, they commonly put their radiators in one of two positions. Sometimes they put it in the front, or try and stand it up down low. The problem with this location is you've got to put long pipes to get to the radiator when the engine's in the back, and to keep the water flow up to the right speed you've got to fit an extra water pump, an electric water pump or a bilge pump out of a boat. If you mount the radiator at the rear in an upright position, yes, some air will flow through, but because there's no ducting around a radiator mounted like this, a lot of your air will escape around the side. Yes, a fan will pull it through, but what you'll find is that your thermo fan will tend to have to run more to suck that air through. If you lay your radiator over at an angle on the rear stays like that, it's even worse, because what happens is instead of the air going through the radiator, the air, like water, takes the path of least resistance and goes down the face of the radiator and out the back rather than through it. That is not effective cooling. I've tried to come up with a different way of doing it that I think will work better. I'm going to copy how they do it in the open wheelers. Because this is a single seat buggy, I've got this room on the side, and from the get-go I've designed this chassis so that I'll put a radiator there and one on the other side. Two radiators split, and there'll be ducting around here. In the front there'll be some carbon fibre bodywork to keep the dirt from the front wheels off the radiator, and there'll be ducting to push the air through and out the back. What I'm using, if you're interested, is two Honda EG Civic radiators, brand new, 40mm thick, cheap as chips. Two radiators instead of one. As far as brake and clutch pedals go, I've decided to not go with second-hand car components, but with special race-built ones. And there's basically four types or choices. First of all, there's the bottom pivoting pedal, and you can have the master cylinder either in front or behind. The other two types are top mounted, where the pedals pivot at the top, and once again you can either have the master cylinder in front or behind. I've gone for pedals which are top pivot and with the master cylinders behind, because I think it suits my frame best. Okay, so I've gone for top mounted pedals with the reservoirs at the back, in other words on the steering wheel side of the pedals. What I really like about these Tilton pedals is I don't need a bias adjustment in the line because I've got adjustment. I've got two master cylinders, one for the front brakes, one for the back, and I've got an adjusting bar there. I can also adjust pedal height for both the clutch and the brake to any degree that I want. So they're a great setup. They're only about 350 bucks from the US, an absolute magic piece of gear. And with this aluminium mounting bracket, it's going to be very easy to fit the pedals where they need to go, right in there. For a throttle pedal, I'm going to see if I can make this one out of my son's RX-7 spare parts bin work in the car. As you can see, I've got quite a bit of fabricating and mounting to do to get all that gear fitted up to the buggy. So be patient while I get on with it. I'll see you in the next episode, but please remember, whilst I'm building this toy, I am also literally building my own house at the same time. Thanks for watching. See you in part 10. This build has been going for 10 years and I'm still not finished, but there's heaps of innovative ideas and race car fabrication techniques shown in the other 19 episodes in this project series. Select this title in my library lists on the main channel page and you'll see them all. I might even finish it one day.